8 guns pointed at Rowena Lund's head, and her first irritated thought was about her coffee. The mug was a good one, ceramic, hand-thrown, bought at a street market in Wicker Park on the one Saturday per year she allowed herself to be a normal person. The dark roast inside had been perfect, 2 minutes off the boil, steeped exactly right. Now it was sitting on her desk, cooling into irrelevance, because 7 armed men in black had just detonated through the door of her second-floor office on South Dearborn, and the 8th, their underboss apparently, had swept it off the desk with his forearm in the initial chaos of establishing dominance. Rowena had watched the mug hit the floor. She'd looked at the man who'd knocked it over. She'd looked at the 7 guns. And then she'd looked at the man they were carrying between them. 6'2" of clearly expensive taste and catastrophic blood loss, one hand pressed to his left side, his charcoal suit jacket soaked through with a dark, spreading stain that had already ruined something that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "You're the forensic recovery specialist," the underboss said. He had a lean, angular face and calculating dark eyes, and he was holding a Beretta in a way that suggested he'd been holding Berettas since before she'd learned to ride a bicycle. Rowena Lund. The one who rebuilt the Kellerman financial data off a water-damaged server. Was, Rowena said, that case closed 18 months ago. You recovered $140 million in hidden transfers off a hard drive someone tried to microwave. It was $162 million, and the microwave was more damaging than most people give it credit for. Who's shooting at him? The underboss blinked. He had not expected that question, or that tone, from a woman sitting alone in a cluttered office at 2 a.m. in a Northwestern sweatshirt that had seen better decades and wool socks with a small hole in the left toe. "Sit down and put the gun somewhere I'm not looking directly at it," Rowena continued, already standing up and moving toward the man who was bleeding on her good hardwood floor. She had a first aid kit in the bottom right drawer of her desk. Old army habit, she'd explained to exactly no one because no one had ever asked. The entrance wound is low on the left lateral torso. If it nicked his spleen, this conversation is going to be very short, and I'm going to need you all to leave before he makes a larger mess. You don't know who he is, the underboss said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite a question. Rowena was already crouching beside the man, pulling on nitrile gloves. She knew who he was now. She'd spent the last 14 months building a secondary file on the Barone family's financial infrastructure as a side project. Unpaid, unprompted, the kind of obsessive pattern mapping that had gotten her promoted twice in the army and fired from 2 corporate forensic firms since. She recognized the bone structure from his tax filings, which she'd obtained through channels she didn't discuss at parties. Silvio Barone, she said, head of the Barone organization, runs legitimate construction through Meridian Build Group and not-so-legitimate import through 3 shell companies registered in Delaware. You should file those annual reports on time, by the way. The Delaware Secretary of State fines are a paper trail a first-year auditor could follow. The room went absolutely still. Silvio Barone's eyes opened fully for the first time since they'd brought him in. They were dark, nearly black, she'd thought from the surveillance footage, but up close she could see they were a very deep shade of brown, the kind that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. He was looking at her the way no one had ever quite looked at her in her 31 years, like she was something requiring immediate and total reassessment. "You're not afraid," he said. His voice was rough with pain, but underneath it was something that moved like a deep current. "I did 2 tours in Mosul with the Army's Financial Crimes Unit tracking insurgent money laundering," Rowena said, pressing clean gauze to his side with firm, practiced pressure. "I've had guns pointed at me by people who meant it considerably more than your man with the Beretta over there. This looks like a through and through. The good news is you're not spitting blood, so your lung is probably intact. The bad news is you need stitches and someone competent." "You seem competent," Silvio said. I'm a forensic accountant, not a surgeon, but I can close this well enough to buy you time. She looked up at the underboss. I need the first aid kit in that lower drawer, and someone has to hold pressure while I work, and I want my coffee replaced. Piero, Silvio said, a single word. The underboss, Piero Manni, she'd confirm the surname later, put the beretta away with visible reluctance and went to get the first aid kit. It took 40 minutes, 2 suture kits she kept for field emergencies, and a considerable amount of Silvio Barone's self-control to hold still for. He did not make a sound. He watched her hands the entire time with that same quality of absolute attention, the way she imagined he watched everything, absorbing, cataloguing, deciding. When she tied off the last stitch and stripped off the gloves, he reached out and caught her wrist. His grip was careful, deliberate, not aggressive, but entirely immovable. The laptop, he said. She'd noticed it already. Military-grade encrypted housing, shattered screen, and what looked like a bullet hole through the left edge of the casing. One of his men had set it on her desk, like an offering when they'd first come in. What's on it? Everything. A pause. My organization's full financial records for the last 6 years. Encrypted. Someone has been moving money through accounts I didn't authorize, and the trail leads back to me, framing me with my own books. His eyes hadn't left her face. Whoever is setting me up also arranged tonight's shooting. If I can't identify them before morning, I have a meeting with the Maranzano family that my enemy will use to finish what they started. Rowena looked at the laptop. She looked at the bullet hole. She looked at Silvio Barone, who was shirtless and sutured in her office at 2 a.m, bleeding on her good floor, watching her with the focused attention of a man who had spent his entire life correctly reading what a room required. My rate is $500 an hour, she said. I'll need access to your full server architecture, not just the laptop, a forensic copy of any cloud backups, and someone needs to get me a fresh coffee. Piero made a sound in his throat that was not quite language. Piero, Silvio said again. Same word, different meaning. Piero went to find the coffee maker. By dawn, Rowena knew 3 things. 1. The data recovery was possible, but would take days, not hours. The bullet had hit the SSD in a way that corrupted the partition table, and the encryption wrapper had a failsafe she needed to work around manually, layer by layer. 2. Whoever was funneling unauthorized transactions through Silvio Barone's organization was sophisticated. They weren't just stealing money, they were building a narrative, a very specific, very detailed paper trail that would satisfy both a federal prosecutor and the Maranzano family's accountants simultaneously. This was not an amateur. This was someone who understood forensic accounting at a high level. 3. She was going with them to the compound on the north shore of Lake Michigan, whether she liked it or not. She didn't like it. She also understood why it was not optional. She'd now seen the laptop, seen the shell company names, and had his blood on her floor. The calculus was not subtle. She packed her forensic kit with methodical efficiency. 3 external drives, her cable kit, her annotated copy of federal asset concealment statutes, 2 changes of clothes, and a travel French press. She dragged her own bag down to the waiting Escalade in the pre-dawn dark of South Dearborn and refused the hand the nearest bodyguard offered. I can carry my own bag, she said pleasantly. The man stepped back. Silvio, seated in the rear compartment with fresh color returning to his face, watched her load her own luggage. Something moved across his expression that she couldn't quite name. Not condescension, not the dismissive glaze she was accustomed to from the kind of powerful men whose finances she'd spent her career dismantling. It looked, uncomfortably, like admiration. You could have called the FBI, he said when she settled into the seat across from him. I still can, she said, pulling out her annotated notes. I chose not to, for now. Why? She looked up. The Chicago skyline sliding past the tinted windows in thin gray light, Lakeshore Drive stretching north in a ribbon of amber. Because whoever set you up is better at this than anyone the FBI currently has on financial crimes. I want to see the full picture before I decide what to do with it. A pause. Also, professionally speaking, it's the most interesting problem I've encountered in 4 years, and I'd like to solve it. Silvio was quiet for a long moment, then the corner of his mouth moved, barely, just enough to register as the ghost of something that might become a smile. You are very unusual, Rowena. Rowena, she confirmed, returning to her notes. If I'm going to drink your coffee for the next 4 days, we don't need to be formal. The compound was a different kind of fortress than she'd expected. Not ostentatious, no gold, no marble excess, just a converted industrial property along the lake, renovated with the kind of clean, brutal elegance that cost enormous amounts of money to look like it cost nothing. The server room was better equipped than 2 of the 3 FBI field offices she'd worked out of. She took over at 9 in the morning and barely left. Silvio sent food to the server room after the first day. His private chef, a small, intense man named Carlo, who communicated primarily through dishes, produced things that made Rowena stop what she was doing and actually eat. A short rib ragu that had been braising for 8 hours, a hand-torn pasta with truffle and egg yolk, a roasted chicken with herbs from the courtyard garden that tasted like something her grandmother had made before arthritis ended her cooking. She ate without apology at the terminal while running data comparisons. Silvio appeared in the doorway on the second evening. He was recovering faster than he had any business recovering. She'd told him so, medically, when she'd checked his sutures. He was dressed now in a dark sweater, and his bearing had the quality of someone who simply did not accept the premise of limitation. He was also, she noted with some irritation, in possession of a very specific kind of physical presence that made the server room feel considerably smaller. You haven't stopped, he said. I found the first shell company layer. There are 6 total. Whoever built this had 2 years of runway. They've been patiently constructing this for a long time. She turned in her chair. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone inside your organization made a deliberate decision a long time ago to dismantle you. They just needed the right moment. Something cold moved through his expression. How many people have full access to our financial architecture? Based on the system permissions 3, she held his gaze. One of them is you. He pulled a chair from the corner and sat down across from her. The bodyguards outside the door gave them privacy without being asked. And the other 2? Your CFO, who I'll need to vet separately, and Piero Manni. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Silvio did not move. His face showed nothing. But she'd spent her career reading what people tried not to show, and she was watching his hands, the slight tightening of his right hand on the chair arm, the barely perceptible change in his breathing. Piero has been with me for 17 years. And whoever did this has been building it for at least 2. A 17-year relationship is long enough to stop checking. She didn't soften it. She'd learned in the army that softening bad intelligence was a form of cruelty. I don't have proof yet, just a pattern. I need 2 more days in the data. Silvio was quiet for a long time. The lake was black outside the narrow windows. The server fans hummed their steady, indifferent chorus. My father trusted the wrong man once, he said finally. His voice was quiet, carrying the specific flatness of old scars. It cost him everything. He made me promise I wouldn't make the same mistake. A pause. I appear to have made the same mistake. Rowena turned back to her terminal, then helped me prove it. He stayed for 3 hours. He answered questions about account structures, about dates, about conversations he barely remembered that she had somehow connected to financial timestamps. He was precise and honest in a way that surprised her. No evasions, no softening of facts that cast him unfavorably. He answered what she asked and nothing more, and he listened to what she said as though it was genuinely worth listening to. At some point, she realized she'd started talking to him like he was a colleague. At some other point, she realized he was talking back the same way, and that the cadence of it felt natural in a way that conversations with most people did not. When he finally stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. "You said 2 tours in Mosul," he said. "Army CID, Financial Crimes Unit. We tracked money to disrupt supply chains." She didn't look up from the screen. "Turns out insurgent money laundering and organized crime money laundering are structurally identical. Different currencies, same fingerprints. You came back and built this." "My father worked a loading dock for 30 years and still died owing money," Rowena said simply. "I decided I'd rather be the one who understands where money goes." She finally looked at him. "The person who's trying to destroy you made one mistake. They're smart, but they're greedy. They couldn't resist taking a percentage above the framing amount. That extra layer is what I followed to find the pattern. People who do things for money always leave a different kind of trail than people who do things for power." Silvio looked at her for a long moment. "What does Piero do it for?" "Both," she said. "He wants your chair and he wants what's in your vault. That combination makes someone careless in a very specific way." She turned back to the screen. 2 more days. He said her name, just her first name, the way he'd been using it since she'd given him permission on the drive up. And when she looked back, the expression on his face was not something she'd seen before on a man like him raw. "Unguarded for just a moment, thank you." She didn't know what to do with that, so she said, "Go rest. Your sutures need another 12 hours before you do anything ambitious," and turned back to her screens. She didn't hear him leave. She just knew at some point that the doorway was empty, and the room felt different, and she had to make herself focus on the data for a full 4 minutes before the numbers came back. The third night was when everything broke. Rowena was deep in the server data. She had the full chain now, all 6 shell companies, the complete 2-year timeline, Piero's digital fingerprints on 47 transactions she could tie to specific dates and verified locations when the compound's entire power grid went down. Not a fuse, not a surge. Every circuit at once. Security lights, monitors, hallway cameras, gate systems, everything black. Rowena had her laptop on battery backup and a military-grade flashlight in her kit. She also had her instincts, which had kept her alive in 2 combat zones and which were currently screaming in every register they possessed. She hit the encrypted send function on the compiled evidence package she'd spent 3 days building, a full forensic report, documented and time-stamped, sent to a secure FBI drop she'd maintained for exactly this kind of situation, before she closed the laptop. The transmission completed in 11 seconds. She confirmed the receipt ping, shut the laptop, and moved to the wall beside the server room door. The compound was not silent. It was making the sounds of men moving with purpose in darkness, a very different sound than anything else, and one she recognized without difficulty. She heard Piero's voice in the main corridor, low and precise, giving tactical directions. She heard Silvio's voice from the east hallway, barking orders as his own men scrambled to respond. And she heard boots, unfamiliar, heavier, more numerous than the compound's own guard force, coming from the service entrance that Piero Manni had, she already understood, opened from the inside. Rowena Lund was not armed. She was a forensic accountant who weighed 220 pounds and had spent 4 years in Army intelligence and 6 more dismantling financial crimes. She was not, technically, a combatant. She picked up the 80-pound emergency server battery from the floor beside the rack. It was housed in a steel casing, it had a handle, and it swung. She cleared the server room, moved down the dark corridor, and came around the east junction at the moment 2 of Piero's imported men were advancing on Silvio's position. Silvio with 1 arm compromised by his injury, his men outnumbered in the immediate engagement. She swung the server battery. The first man went down hard, the steel casing catching him at the shoulder with a sound that was not subtle. The second man turned toward her, which was when 2 of Silvio's men tackled him from behind. Rowena kept moving. She found Piero in the main hall. He was standing with a gun drawn, waiting, composed in the dark in a bespoke suit that hadn't seen a single wrinkle despite everything, when his phone's flashlight caught her, a large, solid woman in wool socks and a northwestern sweatshirt, carrying a server battery. Something in his face shifted between contempt and uncertainty. "You don't belong in this," Piero said. "You stole from a man who trusted you for 17 years, Rowena said. "And then you tried to have him killed in my office on my floor in front of me. I'm already in it." She set the battery down with a deliberate thud. "Also, your mistake was the Cayman account. The third one. You used the same routing sequence you used for the legitimate Meridian billed payments in 2022. Forensic accounting is about patterns, Piero. You got lazy." Piero raised the gun. He didn't fire it. Because Silvio Barone came through the corridor door, and whatever he found when he arrived, Piero with a weapon on the woman who'd spent 3 days dismantling his empire's enemy, and then transmitted that evidence rather than selling it. Something in his face went past cold into something without a name. "Piero," Silvio said. "Don't." Piero's gun hand tightened. "I built half of what you have. I built it. And you were going to give the Maranzano seat to Carlo's kid, a 26-year-old who's never had blood on his hands. You could have come to me. You would have said no." "Yes," Silvio's voice was very quiet. "I would have said no." Piero's gun hand was shaking now, barely, but Rowena could see it. She had spent enough time in rooms with genuinely dangerous people to know exactly what the trembling hand meant. It meant the decision had already been made and was simply waiting for the body to catch up. She stepped sideways, one deliberate step, moving herself out of the direct line. She didn't realize she'd done it until Silvio looked at her, just for a half-second, with an expression she didn't have a language for. What happened next was fast and inevitable, the way things are when men like Piero Manni run out of room to be anything except exactly what they are. His men were already neutralized. His plan had already been transmitted to a federal drop box in a package that would hold up in any court in the country. The room had already decided, and rooms like that don't reverse. When it was over, the compound was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after and sits differently than the quiet before. Rowena stood in the hallway with the server battery handle still warm in her palm. There was a cut on her forearm from a door frame she'd misjudged in the dark. She didn't feel it yet. Silvio crossed the hall and looked at her arm without speaking. "It's fine," she said. "I'll determine that," he said, and took her forearm in both hands with the same careful, deliberate grip as the very first night, turning it toward the beam of a flashlight. He was close. He smelled like gunpowder and cedar, and something clean underneath that she'd noticed for the first time 2 days ago and had been ignoring since. "The evidence package transmitted before any of this started," she said. Her voice was steady. "To a secure FBI drop. The full forensic chain, 47 documented transactions, all 6 shell companies, complete timeline, digital attribution. It'll take them 3 weeks to fully process, but it's there." She paused. "You have 3 weeks to decide what you want to do with that information." He was looking at the cut, not at her face. His thumb moved along the edge of the abraded skin with a gentleness that was absurd, coming from the hands it was coming from. "You transmitted it before you knew how tonight would end." "I transmitted it because it was the right thing to do with it. What happened afterward wasn't contingent on my career interests." Another pause. "I'm aware that's an unusual position for someone in my professional situation." "It is," he said. He looked up. She held very still. She was good at holding very still. The army had made her extremely good at it. "I cost you the case," he said quietly. "Everything you'd built against my organization. 2 years of secondary research." "I had 2 years of research into someone who was being framed by his own accountant," Rowena said. "That's not the same case I thought it was." She met his eyes. "The man you actually are doesn't match the paper trail that's been built about you. I'm a forensic accountant. I follow the evidence." Silvio was quiet for a long time. The lake outside the narrow windows was beginning to catch the first grey suggestion of dawn, the water going from black to deep blue in the slow way it did in November, indifferent to everything that had happened on the shore. "Stay," he said, just that one word, low and deliberate. "I have an office on South Dearborn. I'll improve on it. You can't buy me." "I'm not trying to buy you." His hand was still on her forearm. He hadn't let go. "I'm asking you to stay because you're the only person I've trusted in 4 days who gave me a reason to." A pause. "And because whoever comes after me next will build a better paper trail than Piero did. I need someone who will see it first." Rowena looked at him. She looked at the lake. She thought about her office, about the coffee mug on the floor, about the 14 months of work she'd done on a man she'd understood less well than she'd believed. She thought about the evidence transmitting in 11 seconds and the way it felt when she hit send, not like a betrayal and not like a rescue, but like the right answer to the right question, which was the only kind of answer she'd ever been able to live with. "My rate," she said, "is $500 an hour." Silvio's mouth moved. It became, this time, an actual smile, unhurried, unguarded, reaching the places where smiles are real. "I've been watching you, Bill. And I want a proper coffee setup in whatever room I'm working in, not a pod machine." Done. "And I'm keeping the South Dearborn office." Keep it. He still hadn't let go of her arm. Rowena. The way he said her name, the weight he put in the second syllable, made something warm and inconvenient happen in her chest that she chose for the moment to categorize as adrenaline fatigue. "I'm asking you to stay." She looked at him one more time. Then she looked at the lake going gold at the edges. She thought about her father on the loading dock. She thought about Mosul in July, following money through the dust. She thought about every room she'd walked into where the important people looked past her, through her, around her, towards something smaller and more conventionally worth their attention. She thought about this man, in this hallway, holding her forearm like it mattered. Not despite who she was, but because of it. "I know," she said. And she stayed. The compound's generator kicked back on somewhere beneath them, and the fluorescent lights came up in the server room down the hall, the same practical, unromantic light she worked under every day on South Dearborn. The servers rebooted in a cascade of soft mechanical sounds. The evidence of 3 days of work was autotismaceted, already time-stamped, already becoming the foundation of something she hadn't fully named yet. Silvio Barone, the most powerful man in Chicago, looked at Rowena Lund, plus-size, ex-army, wool socks, better at following money than anyone he would ever meet, and did not look away. She had spent her entire career finding what was hidden in the numbers. She had spent her entire life being dismissed by rooms that never bothered to look at her properly. This man was looking. She decided, with the steady practicality that had carried her through 2 combat deployments, and a decade in a field that had never quite been built for her, that she could work with that. "Find me a French press," she said, "and then we need to talk about your Delaware filing situation. It's genuinely embarrassing." Silvio laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, the kind that cost something, and went to find someone to locate a French press at 5 in the morning. Rowena sat back down in the server room, opened her laptop and started a new file. She titled it Barone Ongoing. Outside, the lake went gold.